Gentlemen, today we tackle introductions, and the task at hand is to understand how we can write an effective introduction that from the first word to the last word draws in the reader and effectively communicates what your essay will be about. I think all too often introductions are kind of seen as this fluff. We need our thesis, we know that, but the rest of it we just got to fill in the gaps to get something on paper, to turn it in, to get the grade. And I contend that introductions are quite possibly one of the most important aspects of your essay and creates a first impression for you. If I don't know you and I'm grading your essay or I'm reading your essay and one, you've got errors in it or you've got boring thoughts, then that immediately impacts my perception of you as a writer. On the other hand, if you successfully grab my interest, draw me into the essay, keep me interested in what you'll be writing about, then I think, wow, this guy knows his stuff. This guy can write. I'm looking forward to reading the rest of it. So I think the introduction is a really key piece, especially as you get into situations, SAT, where you're going to have to write for people who don't know you. So in those first few words, what you can communicate. You know, in your first two essays, I saw some good attempts at introductions, and then I saw introductions that just kind of threw words on the paper to get to the thesis. So what I'd really like to do is to work on introductions so that as we're writing, it becomes an ingrained habit of writing effective introductions. So let's look at the structure of a introduction. You have your general information, the way you draw the reader in at the top of the funnel. So you start broad, and then you slowly focus to the narrow, which is the meat of the introduction, your thesis. I call this the HBT approach to introductions. Your hook, your bridge, and your thesis. So what information are you going to use to hook your reader into your introduction? How are you going to transition from that hook to the topic of the essay? And then 3, what are you going to argue in the essay? So here's the thing. Here's what I saw in the last 2 essays, almost all across the board. Really solid thesis statements, hooks that were okay, tried some effective methods, some were good, some fell flat. But across the board, I did not see the bridge. I saw, let's take Old Man and the Sea. I can remember one essay specifically that gave a great quote from the book about Santiago and how long it took him to defeat the fish or something. And then the next, within 2 sentences, he was at the thesis. And the thesis is about manhood. So he had the quote, he described the quote, and then bam, we're at manhood. And there's no connection between that quote and the topic of the paper, which is manhood. Same thing with Into the Wild. You know, 95% of you, I think more than that, argue that McCandless was a reckless idiot, which is fine, which is exactly what I expected. But what I would often see is an introduction that was descriptive, what Into the Wild was about, who Chris McCandless was. And then, bam, next sentence, the thesis. Chris McCandless was a reckless idiot because A, B, and C. So there was no transition between this background information and your thesis decrying him as an idiot. You know, we kind of need to connect the dots. We have A, we have C, but we need to have B to get us in between. So the rest of this PowerPoint, I'm going to talk about the H's and I'm going to talk about the B, the hook and the bridge. So the H, how do we effectively grab our reader's attention? So I'm going to use, for the purpose of this slide, let's say you're writing an essay arguing one side of a controversial topic. And for the purpose of example, I will just use abortion. We're going to argue against abortion. So a narrative, using a personal anecdote story to set the scene for the thesis. You know, let's say maybe you drove by an abortion clinic and saw protesters there. Maybe you protested in an abortion clinic. Generally, it's just a way to connect you as the writer to the essay in a personal way that would be of great interest to the reader. So it has to be interesting. It has to be a compelling story. Not just any story will do. So we can't say something like, I was sitting at home one day and saw a news article or saw a news show about abortion, and I didn't like that. that's not an interesting narrative. Yes, it's a narrative, but it certainly doesn't grab my interest. Rhetorical question. This is a really good way to bring the reader into the essay, but it doesn't work for everything. But how can you grab the reader's attention right away? With a controversial topic essay, it works great. Do you believe that life begins at conception or birth? Bam. You've effectively grabbed the reader's attention. Some essays might require a little bit of explaining before you get into actually writing about the essay. This is not necessarily the most interesting way to begin an introduction, but sometimes necessity dictates this. So do you need to explain some terms that are going to be used, or explain an idea? Maybe if you're writing an essay on life issues, maybe you need to just kind of explain what life issues are, right? These are just ideas, these are examples. I'm going to combine the last two, a startling statistic or a quote. So you have some outside information from something someone said, you have a statistic that is really interesting that you want to use, it's related to your topic, that's great, use it. Here's my one caveat on that. You have to make sure it is related to what you write about. You have to make sure that in some way it fits with the rest of the essay. So let's say I'm writing, again, my essay on abortion, and I give a statistic on how many abortions there are in the United States on a daily basis, but I don't mention frequency of abortion anywhere else in my essay. Why did you use that quote? What purpose did that serve? So make sure, these are great ways to start an essay. Make sure it's relevant to the rest. So as I move through now, I'm going to speak on just a few examples of starting a hook that aren't as effective. The dictionary definition. So I'm going to use war for these next two slides as the topic. Webster's dictionary defines war as a state or period of armed hostility or active military operations. If I'm the reader and you start your essay like that, I say, I'm falling asleep. So what? Who cares? Anyone can look up a word in a dictionary, so that's not exactly a compelling way to start an introduction. A placeholder introduction. This is when you say sentences that basically, guys, are meaningless. You're not really saying anything at all, you're just filling up space. We like to call this BS, when you're BSing in an essay. Sometimes guys do this just to get the length of requirement or get it done, but we can cut through this. Look at this example. World War II was one of the most tragic wars in American history. There were many different aspects of the war, each of which created their own problems for all involved. We can look at this statement and say, this doesn't really tell us anything. This is just kind of talking about war, but isn't interesting, doesn't begin taking us to what the paper is about. It kind of is stating the obvious. So don't use empty sentences, guys. Hooks that sink is when we make claims like, we can all agree. The reader can agree that war is a perpetual problem in our society. Don't assume the reader is on your side from the first sentence. And statements like this, you can't prove them, so they're just these soft, mushy statements that have no meaning in an essay. One can assume that blah, blah, blah. Don't use those phrases. The other one is what I call the dawn of man introduction. When you make really big, sweeping statements that serve no purpose, that are kind of repetitive, but you're kind of using tradition or a time precedent to be impressive. When you say, ever since the dawn of man, war has always been a problem in human history. So the idea here that as a reader I should be impressed. Wow, he's talking about all of time, forever. So wow, war really is an issue. I think we can see that this statement is kind of an empty approach to a good introduction. And then finally, the bridge. Again, connecting the dots between your hook and your thesis statement. I'm really happy with how well you did on your thesis statements in the last two essays. I thought they were phenomenally done, well written, really created good roadmaps for your essay. So where we need to work on is this bridge. How do I connect the dots? How do I take it from this broad, general conversation to the specifics of what my paper is going to argue? And this should be done in more than just a quick transition sentence. This should be 2 to 3 solid sentences. So the goal for this next writing assignment is to take these hypothetical prompts and to create an interesting hook, create an effective bridge, and write a thesis. So that's kind of the brief overlook of introductions. Come see me. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks, guys.